Eric, welcome.
All right. I feel so blessed to be here, and I've had many blessings in my life. After spending 12 years with the University of Michigan Depression Center, where I was performed as outreach coordinator trying to put programs together to break stigma down, as of 3 years ago, I left the University of Michigan and went to Eisenhower Center and created a program called After the Impact, and where we actually do neurocognitive treatment, behavioral treatment for former athletes and also combat veterans. So I feel very blessed to be in that space. I've had many blessings along my life. In order to understand somebody, you have to kind of see where they're coming from. And so I'm going to share my story with you. But first, I just want to make one point. The book, Real Men Do Cry. Okay. Sometimes when you put something out there, somebody comes up and says, "Oh, wow, I know why you wrote that book." And I had a lot of my ex-teammates come up and go, "Hey, was playing for the Detroit Lions that bad?" No, it wasn't. In fact, I have a former teammate that lives in Tyler. I looked him up this week and I found out he's in Los Angeles for the weekend, so I missed him. His name's Eric Williams, if anybody knows Eric Williams or not. But anyhow, so my story begins back when I was young. And like most other athletes, we start off playing our sports when we were small. I started off with Pop Warner football, and it wasn't the football so much as I guess the attraction of the allure. It was silly, but I liked wearing the equipment. I thought it was pretty cool. You know, get to put the helmet on. You know, you get the shoulder pads on. You know, you get all the pads and stuff, and you get to go out and hit people. This is really, really cool. I thought it was wonderful. But I think it was just wearing the equipment, and I don't know if it was a mask or a cover that I did it. Same thing in baseball. When I started off in baseball, you know, as a catcher, because I wanted to wear the mask and I wanted to wear the shin guards and the chest protector. It was the equipment that was the draw for me. And so anyway, what I did find out though when I started playing Pop Warner football was there's so much more involved in it, and that was the teamwork, that was being part of something. You know, because I think, you know, this inside of us, you know, we're trying to attach to something. I wasn't a very good athlete to start off with. Is there an echo in this? I wasn't a very good athlete to start off with. In fact, I was like the second team guy. But I was one of those guys, if you got knocked down, I just got back up again because I wanted to be part of something. And so I started off in Pop Warner football, went through Pop Warner. When I finished in Pop Warner, I made the next natural bridge into high school. And this is where these important people start coming into my life. I get into high school, and my coach, the first high school coaching job, head job that he comes in and he sits us all down in the gymnasium and he tells us how he's going to run this team. He says, I've got a list of rules here, and this is how I'm going to run the team. So he had a consequence for every rule. So if you're late to practice, this is what's going to happen. If your grades drop below a certain point, this is what you're going to have to do. If you drop the F-bomb, you're going to have to give me push-ups. But he had a list of rules and consequences for everything. But he said, if you follow these rules, there will be one other consequence you'll have. You'll win. Wow, this guy just gave me a format on how to win. And so about that time, my body finally started catching up, and I started becoming a pretty decent athlete. And by the time I was a junior, I got the starting job as a quarterback. And I followed those rules. Next thing I know, by the time I'm a senior, we'd gone to the playoffs, and I got recognized by one scout, which was, he happened to be on vacation from Utah, and he was down watching the other team because the good quarterbacks went to the 4A schools. I grew up in Southern California. I was actually born in Lubbock, Texas. And I grew up in Southern California. Yeah, thanks someone in Lubbock, I don't know, but anyway. But I grew up in Southern California. I was at a 3A high school. The big schools are the 4A schools, and the quarterbacks and the big quarterbacks went to the Catholic schools, and you know, and I just kind of got lifted behind, but that's okay. There happened to be a coach that was down for vacation watching the other team, and he saw me play. So I started getting these letters. You know, Utah State. Here it is, you know, I look at it and I get these pamphlets and I look at them and they see these pictures of the mountains and everything else, and brings us into California. That looked pretty good. But anyway, so he'd come by the house. He came by the house and he talked to my parents. That made me feel really good. You know, oh, great, this is great. This guy wants me. The thing is, you know, he came by again. And I got my one scholarship offer, only one scholarship offer, and that was Utah State University. I didn't tell him he was my only offer. I liked him coming over to the house. It made me feel really good. So anyway, I got my one scholarship offer, Utah State University, and I went to Utah. About a month before I was to report to camp, I was in a car accident where we flipped the dune buggy. I was not driving at the time. I was seat belted in. It flipped. It hit some rocks. It flipped out into the river, about 30 feet out, 30 feet down, but it landed on its wheels. I woke up. My head was spinning. I had blood coming out my ear. And I remember seeing myself from above looking down. And so I knew where I was. I hooked the seat belt, and I started crawling out of this dune buggy and started working my way up to the rocks and got to the road. And then there's a flash. I don't remember how long it took. I just remember waking up, excuse me, and I was in the hospital, and they're cutting my pants off because I was soaking wet, and my head was just, turned out I had fractured my skull, and I had some spinal fluid coming out of my ear. Neurologist comes in, you'll never play football. That's it, end of your career. My dad fired him and got another neurologist and said, he wrote off on it and says, okay, you should be fine in about a month or 2 months. You'll heal. I reported to camp, and when I first got there, I was a little nervous because practice starts before school. That's okay, I fit right in. We went on. After my first year, we had a coaching change. So I was a redshirt freshman, and this new coach comes in, and he sits us down in the auditorium, and he says this to us. He goes, I've only got one rule, how I'm gonna run this team, and that's the do right rule. You guys are old enough now to know the difference between right and wrong. And so if I say be there at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're there at 7 o'clock in the morning. There are no excuses. You're accountable to yourself. I thought, oh, man, this is great, because I had a list of rules growing up, and I know what these rules mean. I know how to win. And so I applied that do right rule. We started getting a team that kind of did the right thing and followed in behind us. And the next thing I know, I became a starter, and I was a 4-year starter for Utah State University. I ended up being ranked 6th in the NCAA my senior year. We went to the playoffs twice, back-to-back, won the championship. And then because of that, I started getting recognition by the scouts of the NFL, and it looks like I'm going to get drafted. One guy even told me I was going to go as high enough as late in the first round, and I'm excited. But he said, if you go ahead and play in a bowl game, you know, we might get you to see other than Utah State, and maybe you might even go higher than that. So I played in a bowl game. It was in that bowl game I got my knee blown out. I got hit, my knee went out. I thought, that's it. It's not going to happen now. But I might still get drafted. So I'm sitting around, and I'll never forget this. I'm sitting around, and it was in my trailer. Times are different now, right? So I was in my trailer waiting for the draft to happen. Now they just fly them all in. But I'm there, and I got my friends around, and I'm waiting. And, you know, nothing happens. The first round goes by. And the second round goes by, and nothing happens. And the third round goes by, and nothing happens. And then I get a phone call. I pick up the phone. It says, Eric, we're going to take you. You'll be the first pick in the 4th round. I'm going, whoa, cool. Hey, I'm getting drafted, man. I'm getting drafted. This is great. I'm so excited. I'm getting drafted. Who is this anyway? He says, this is Coach Clark, Detroit Lions. No. I don't know anything about Detroit. You know, I was hoping West Coast or something, you know, the Dallas Cowboys, something big, right? But no, I'm going to Detroit. That's okay, I got drafted. And I showed up. And it's a little bit different back then than it is today, because they brought in 140 guys into camp, and they keep 45 of them. Today, they'll bring 78 guys into camp, and they'll keep 58 of them. So there's a lot of attrition that goes on in those 8 weeks of training camp that goes on. A lot of hitting, a lot of, you know, bashing heads and everything else. And sure enough, you know, after that 8-week period, I was one of the 45 guys. I actually made the team. And I'll never forget the coach, the first day of regular season, of regular practice, called us all in when you all found out you made the team, and he brings this big book. It's about this big. It was the playbook. Today, you know, they're all on iPads and stuff, but brought it, and he opens up the first page, and he starts reading from it. It's called The Best in the Business. And he starts reading from it, and he says, you are now a professional. I expect you to behave like a professional, because not only are you getting paid for what you do, but you also represent this organization. Not just yourself, but you represent this organization, and I expect you to behave that way, like a professional. But I don't want you to be just a professional. I want you to be a passionate professional. I want you to go with gusto in everything that you do and give it your all. That's what I expect, and that's what you should expect for yourself. A passionate professional. That sounds good. I could be passionate. Now I'm a professional. I'm getting paid to do this. This is awesome, right? But the first year, I was just a holder for the kicker. And I was the third team quarterback. Third team. Going into my second year, obviously I wanted to move up along the ranks, but 6 weeks into the season, the starting quarterback breaks his hand, and he's out. Second team quarterback goes in and plays the next 2 games. And he sucked really bad. Yay! So anyway, I didn't really show it that way, but that's what I was thinking on the inside. Oh man, so what happens is they shove him aside, of course, and I get the phone call. Yes, Eric, we're going to start you next week. Monday Night Football, Chicago Bears. Our cross rivalry on Monday Night Football. The first thing I was going, I'm starting, man. And all of a sudden it started dawning on me, oh my gosh. Not only will my parents get a chance to see this first start, not only will my friends, my former teammates, and everybody else get a chance to see the first, everybody's going to get a chance to see this first start, right? Oh boy. It better be good. I practiced real hard. I got ready for it. And sure enough, into the game, first play is going to be a pass. I forget. I walked up to the line of scrimmage. Throw the pass. It's a 40-yard pass. It's complete. And the 80,000 people in the Silverdome just went, and I was one of them. Yeah! As I ran down the field. This is awesome. That turned out to be a very momentous game for me, as I ended up throwing for 4 touchdown passes. I ran for 2 touchdowns, and the NFL actually deemed it the best debut of a quarterback on Monday Night Football in history, and it still stands today. Yeah, cool, right? Yeah. I had thrown a 94-yard touchdown pass as one of the touchdown passes, and I would like to take all the credit, but it was actually the receiver did most of the work. But it was a blitz play. I'm standing on the 6-yard line, 3rd down, right? So I think we're just going to run it and then punt. But here comes our receiver, because we didn't have those things I have today, right? The receivers would either come plays in or signals, okay? Receiver comes running in. His name is Leonard Thompson. Guy was a running back in college, and we made him a wide receiver. Great athlete. And he comes running in, and he's running in, and his face looks like this, and all of a sudden you could see his face change. Because as good as an athlete Leonard was, sometimes he wasn't so smart. He forgot the play. He gets in the huddle, I go, what's the play? Now the clock's running, he goes, I forgot. I go, what do you mean you forgot? He said, well, it was a play action pass, and it went to me. That's what he said. I go, 134, Y hold, X post? Yeah, that's it. He didn't know. Okay. Called the play, got out of the huddle really quick. They have a blitz on, they come, they blitz. I do my play action pass, boom, boom. I go back to throw. Just as I get hit, I let the ball go, and Leonard Thompson broke across, he caught it. Takes off running, 94 yards for a touchdown. And as I get up, I'm standing on this end zone. I'm looking at him cross that end zone, and the place is just going nuts. And I realized, just took it all in. For that moment right there, the hair back on my neck stood up, and I said, I made it. Oh my gosh, I just made a childhood dream. And I was like floating on cloud 9. In fact, I don't think I slept for 3 days after this game. It was just like, wow. You had one of those points in time in life where I was saying, wow. And that was one of them. Well, I went on and continued to start for Detroit, and went to the playoffs twice, won the division 1 year. I was MVP for about 5 or 6 years starting, and went through 3 head coaches. I went through 5 offensive coordinators, every 2 years learning another offense. And then somewhere around the line, about the 6th or 7th year going into it, I started getting beat up quite a bit, started getting hit a lot. And I started getting injured. And the thing about an injury is it's not that big of a deal, because injury is part of the game, right? But when you have to have surgery and sit out and you get put on injury reserve, or that's tough, because that means the following year you've got to come back, get back in shape, get back mentally, and get your starting job back, okay? And that's not always easy to do. But I made that journey several times. I'd had elbow surgery and I had thumb surgery from a broken hand. I came back, I got my starting job back. I go back and this is probably the worst injury I had. I dropped back. Charles Haley, Hall of Famer, came around to hit me, slid down, and he landed on my leg, and I heard it snap. right? I didn't feel anything, right, because I was in shock, but I heard it snap. And I remember hearing 60,000 people at Candlestick Park go, oh. I looked over, Charles Haley had already gotten up and was waving, for the trainer to come out to the field. So that's not good. So I looked down and my foot was on backwards. And then I went, oh, too, because I know what that meant, right? I know it meant I'm going to be out. So I go get surgery, they put a plate, screws, stuff, put it all back together again, tie all the ligaments and tendons and stuff, put it back in. And I came back the following year, not quite the same. I couldn't run as much as I could before. And also, I wasn't quite the same mentally either. I mean, these ups and downs are tough, and fighting through it, and it takes a lot out of you. And at this time, going into my 10th year in the league now, getting my starting job back, I'd gone through divorce. My wife and I had split up. She had taken the kids, my 2 kids, gone back to Utah. But it's okay. I got my starting job back. And so I'm going to go against Minnesota. Got my first starting job back against Minnesota. And I go to Minnesota. Wasn't quite the same person, as I said, both mentally and physically. And they start beating me up. They start blitzing. Start getting hit. But I threw 2 touchdown passes. But they were both for Minnesota. I threw an interception for a touchdown. Went right back out. Threw another interception for a touchdown. They pulled me in the 3rd quarter. They put me on the bench. And the next day they cut me. 32 years old, what do you do now? I didn't know. This is what I knew, right? That's where my identity, that's who I was. That's all I knew up to this point. 32 years old, what do you do now? Transitions are tough. They're tough on anybody. This one happens to be particularly tough because you lose your identity, you lose your relationships, your social setting. You also lose your doctors, you lose your income. It's all done in one whack, and it's not predictable. You don't know when it's going to happen. It happened to me mid-season. Done. Didn't know quite what to do, so I took some time and kind of traveled around a little bit, to see people that, I kind of reconnect with some people. I ended up eventually getting remarried, so started a life with my wife, and I started a business because I knew I had to do some work. Started this business, didn't know anything about the business really when I started. It was in the insurance industry. But I threw myself into it. I'll just do it this way. I'll just give it everything I've got. It's worked in the past. And I did. And I worked at that for about 6 years. And in about 6 years, I was actually starting to make more money than I did when I played football up here. But you know what? That's when it hit me. That's when all of a sudden everything came together and I felt flat. I didn't feel alive anymore. And I said to myself, is this it? Is this all there is? And so I just kind of went downhill. And I quit going out to make calls. I didn't want to leave the house anymore. And at this point in time now, we have 2 little ones, that are there. And my wife's a little concerned, what's going on? What's happening? Well, don't worry about it. I've got people that will do that for me. I didn't, but it sounded good. So, call her for a while. And eventually what happened is the business started fading and going downhill, I just didn't care that much right then. I just didn't feel right. Well, as the business does fall apart, and this has gone on for a period of time, I decided I've got to do something to try and save this business. And so I decided to fly down to Arizona and pick up a new product. But I'm not doing very well. And my wife knows that. And so she says, I'll drive you to the airport, make sure you get there okay. And as we're driving to the airport, and we're going down the road, I remember these things thoughts that I had in my head all kind of come up, and I see the sign for the airport, and it just hits me, I just don't want to do this. And I remember reaching over, grabbing a napkin. It was on the console, and I grabbed it, and there's a pen, and I said, I'm sorry, I love you, and I handed it to my wife, and she looked at it, and she looked at me, and I opened the door to the car, and I jumped out. We were going about 75 miles an hour when I hit the pavement. Luckily, the cars behind me on the freeway, they swerved, they didn't hit me. I ended up off the side of the road, kind of a bloody pulp. I woke up in the hospital, and I was all bandaged up. They did some skin grafts and stuff, and I wake up in the hospital, and there's a psychiatrist sitting next to me, and there's my parents who'd flown in from California sitting at the foot of my bed. This is in Michigan. And they're having this conversation about what we're going to do with Eric. And the psychiatrist is telling them we can put a hold on him, we can put him in the psychiatric ward, we can do an evaluation and find out what's going on with Eric. And I remember hearing this conversation, and as I come to, and I tried to call timeout. No, wait. I was all bandaged up. That's not going to happen. Because what I heard in my head, and I remember when I was playing, I remember there's a quarterback by the name of Mike Tomczak that played for Chicago. And in the locker room, there's a paper, the newspaper, and I picked it up, and the paper said, Tomczak seeks psychologist to deal with Coach Ditka. And I went, are you kidding me? What a wuss. He's got to go see a psychologist to deal with his coach? I remember that moment of being that guy that's belittling somebody who's seeking help. Then, I'm fine. You just jumped out of a car. But that was then. I'm okay now. So, he throws up his hands, so there's nothing he can do. So he leaves. My parents, I told them that if they do anything, then, if they try and put an order on me or something, then I'd never talk to them again. So they didn't do that. And my wife had taken the note and hidden the note so nobody else knew it. So the paper comes out and says, Hipple falls out of car, front page. It didn't say jumped, it said falls out. And I don't know if you've ever tried to open a car door going 70 miles an hour. Hopefully you haven't. But it's not easy to do. You can't fall out of a car with that speed. There's a lot of wind resistance, right? It's hard to push open. But the other story was unbelievable. People wouldn't believe I jumped. Why? I can't believe that story. Wow, that must have been weird, some freak accident. And it's kind of a running joke, and I wanted it that way, so I didn't have to deal with it. So for the next 3 years, I went about my business. I kind of shoved everything aside, put my head down, and kept going forward. And I took it as a joke. Hey, you fall out of any cars lately, Eric? Not today. My wife, she kicked me out last time, right? So I was making jokes about it. The trouble with that is I didn't learn anything. I never sought treatment. I never asked questions. I buried it and said, that's over with. The trouble with that is 3 years later, when my son, who was going back and forth between my ex-wife and myself, living with her, then living with me, he was going through transitions of his own. 15 years old, and as he comes to live with me as a freshman, he starts off the year banner. Friends, they love him. Everything's going on really well. So he made that transition into high school good. Goes along and he becomes captain of his freshman basketball team. Grades are doing well. And then after the holidays, starting off in the spring, all of a sudden, he starts going downhill. And you can see it kind of in his mannerisms, the way he held his head. He didn't feel quite well, he said. And he started not wanting to go to school. Jeff, are you okay? Is it somebody bullying you? Is that what's going on? No, Dad, I just don't feel good. Is it a teacher? Is that what's going on? No, Dad, I just don't feel good. He didn't have the language to explain to me exactly what was going on, and I didn't have the language to ask the right questions what was going on. And so we just kind of got through it. Well, sure enough, as his grades started dropping, he became ineligible to play basketball, so now he's sitting on the bench. And I remember looking at him sitting there, and it was just, you just want to do something, but I didn't know what to do. So I took him to the doctor 2 different times. Took him to his primary care physician. But I didn't take him to find out what was wrong with him. I actually took him to prove to him there was nothing wrong with him. Hey, look, your blood work's fine. You've got to go to school. Hey, you don't have a temperature today. You've got to go to school. And I started driving him to school to make sure he got there. Sure enough, as time goes on, it was a Saturday morning, and I remember walking into his room because I had to leave on a business trip. And it was early 6 a.m. or so, and Saturday morning I walked in, I woke him up just to let him know, I'm leaving, I'll be back, in a couple days. And he kind of hid his face a little bit, but I looked, and he had tears in his eyes. And he goes, okay. And I looked at him, I said, you know what, I don't know exactly what this is, but when I get back, we'll find out, we'll fix it. And I left. It was the next day that I'm in Vancouver, and I get a phone call from my wife, and she asked me if I'm sitting down. Why? She goes, Jeff is dead. In that moment, boom, you just want to go take a step back and just stop and take a step back, and so no, but it's too late. It's happened. I just felt frozen. I took an emergency flight home, went right to the morgue. He'd gone in the next room and used a weapon that he got recovered from underneath my bed, hunting rifle. So as I'm looking at him now in the morgue, and that moment right there, I just want to die. How could I let this happen? The guilt was so unbearable, but also the loss was so unbearable. How could I let this happen? I just wanted to die. The problem is, when I jumped out of the car, I actually thought I was doing everybody a favor. I thought they'd be better off without me. I've got insurance. My wife would be better off. That's how low I felt, how worthless I felt, that they would be better off without me. But now I'm standing here, and I know it's not true. It hurts the survivors. So I know I can't do that. So what do? I just want to be numb. I can't feel this. And so I used all the tools to my disposal. Alcohol that's always been, fun in my life and celebratory, now it became something different. It became to be numb. I could get Vicodins, pretty easily because of all the injuries I had, so I started using those to be numb. I actually had a big bottle, like a pharmacy-sized bottle of Xanax that a friendly doctor had given me, and I was using those. The thing is, I was numb. I wasn't worried about my 7-year-old daughter, who was my youngest, who was in the next room when the gun went off, how she was feeling. I wasn't worried about my wife as far as, had to deal with all this stuff, how she was feeling. I was just numb, and that's my course of action. I was numb. I was still making money, income. I was still functional, but I was numb. And this went on for about a year. In that year span, I was pretty vacant. I was numb. Well, I finally got pulled over on a DUI. I got pulled over, and I remember when that happened, part of me was almost kind of relieved. I get in front of the judge, though, and the judge says, hey, no problem. We got these programs. You're not going to have to, go to jail. We got this program, this program, this program. And I didn't do any of them because I didn't care. So he threw me in jail for a weekend, trying to prove his point. Came back out, still didn't do any of them. He threw me in jail for 3 days, nothing. Threw me in jail for 4 days, nothing. Threw me in jail for a week, still didn't do anything. Finally, he threw his hands up. He says, I don't know what to do with you. He says, here, take the rest of the sentence. And it was 58 days. They sent me in. So I was in jail for 58 days. And you know what? I was almost, as I said, relieved. Because I could be in my cell and not have to do anything, and not have to listen to anybody, and not have to deal with any of this. The thing is, the way the cells were set up is they were kind of like, think about this room as a pod, and all the cells faced inwards, right? In the middle was a common area. Okay. And my cell was over there, and I sat in there and didn't have to deal with anybody or anything. I didn't even come out unless I had to. I just stayed there. Well, about 3/4 of the way through, I started kind of, I don't know if it's curiosity or what drove me to it, I decided to come out and start walking around and asking other guys, like, I wonder what their story's about. And I remember walking over, and there were some guys playing, dominoes, and some guys playing checkers. Nobody was playing chess because none of us were that smart, but anyway. But the guys that were playing cards over here, I walked up on, and I said, I was listening to them talk, and if you can hear me, I was talking loud. There were 4 sitting right here, and we're playing cards. And then one guy was explaining to the other 3 guys the reason why he's here. There it is. Sorry. There? Good? That's it. Okay. So I should have said something. Anyway, I thought it was just my tail wagging. So I listened to these guys talking. He's explaining to the other 3 guys the reason why he's here. And he says, well, I'm here because this chicken cop pulled me over because my tail light wasn't working. That's why I'm here. Dude, you're here because it's your 3rd DUI. That's why you're here. And then it hit me. Oh, my gosh. This guy's got no accountability or no responsibility at all. And then it hit me even harder. Is that me? I'm here because my son died? Is that my excuse? Is that my reason? Man, I do not want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And so I vowed at that moment, I want answers. I want to find out what happened to me. I want to find out what happened to him. And for that matter, I also want to find out what happened to my mom when my dad would tell us, Mom's not coming out of her room for a few days. She's having one of her spells. What was that about? I want these answers. So I decided, I want the answers, the pieces of the puzzle, make this thing all make sense. But the first thing I did was I called up, because I wasn't allowing anybody to come. But I allowed Lim Barney. Lim Barney is a Hall of Famer, famous Detroit Lion in our area. He's older than I am. And he's also a minister. He's ordained. And I had him come in, and he brought a Bible, and he signed it, Lim Barney, Hall of Fame. And he gave me the Bible. I grew up as a Christian. And I believe in Christian values and Christian way of life. But somewhere along that line, that track of being up here and going through these cycles, but things came pretty easily, when you're up here in the NFL, that I'd gotten away from that. And getting away from that, I lost some of those values and some of those things. So here I am, I've got it. So I got on my knees, and I prayed. And when I got out, the first thing I did is I went to find some answers on the physical side. And I went to the University of Michigan Depression Center. And as there, I got invited to a lunch and learn. And a lunch and learn is, well, you guys know what lunch and learn is, right? Okay. I didn't know what it was. Okay. I just heard lunch, and so I'm going. A lunch and learn is actually where you go and you share a meal, and doctors or whatever will teach you something, right? And these 3 doctors got up and they're talking about the disciplines that they work in, and one was talking about depression, and my jaw hit the ground when they started talking about symptoms and what's going on in the brain science. I went, oh my gosh, that's me. That's my son. That's my mom. How come we're not talking about this stuff? It's unbelievable. In fact, I got angry because if you know this information, you're not sharing it, what's wrong? So I started bothering them. I bothered the director, and finally he ended up hiring me part-time as an outreach person. He sent me to this 8-week mini medical school about depression, and I started learning about that. But the first thing I did was I went and got suicide prevention training because I wanted to be able to save a life if I ever got in front of somebody so they wouldn't have to go through what I went through. But like you said, it didn't take long to figure out, if you're going to talk about suicide prevention, we have to talk about the mental illnesses and the brain illnesses that go along with it. And so I dove into the depression side, dove into the outreach side, and started creating programs to try and knock off the stigma so people would come and get help. And it was that journey that led me to this idea that if I just go to a place, and we were doing a school program at the time, if I just go to a place and I'm going to talk about depression and talk about mental illness, I'm going to lose a lot of the crowd because they're going to disassociate because of the stigma. So we started calling it mental fitness because that applies to everybody. Because I don't care who you are, we can always up our game a little bit by being a little bit more fit by the things that we do and how we take care of ourselves. So let's talk about that. And if I talk about that, I can always open up these other doors and talk about the things that go wrong. And so on that platform, we created this program after the impact where we see combat veterans together with former athletes because these 2 populations are highly stigmatized about getting help. But I also found out that, you have to use language that makes sense, right? Because that's how I learned it. So I start off with this thing here. What we don't know can hurt us. In fact, what we don't know, in some cases, can kill us. You see, and the reason why I use this is because it's so easy and so simple to explain that in football, we study film after film after film after film of the other team because we want to know what they do and how they can affect us. Because the more information we have about it, the more successful we will be. What kind of defense they run, what kind of personnel do they have, how successful can we be is based on information about the other team. And it dawned on me, why don't we do the same thing about our own health? What are the things that are out there that we can learn about that maybe we can protect ourselves or help ourselves or prepare ourselves for? And so what we don't know can hurt us. I talked about some of the accolades I had, MVP, playoffs and stuff like that. But it's really funny that I get known for this clip right here. It's actually on YouTube. It's called Hipple Gets Hit. But this is me in action. But I should have called timeout. They ran a defense I didn't recognize. But here's the result. You have to start it over.
He has him very close to the goal line.
First and 18, and Eric on the rollout. Whoa! Eric Hipple. He is bombed by Scott Brantley, and he's hurt.
That's always the danger that a professional quarterback faces when he comes on rollout action. Looking from the end zone, Tampa had this played perfectly. You can see that they stayed back, inviting him to run. Hipple had nothing left to do. Watch 52. What contact. That's Scott Brantley, known for his ferocious hitting, and that time he gave a shoulder and a head right to the head of Hipple. Knocked his helmet off. Let's look at that from another angle. Hipple trying to get a receiver open, but he sees that he can't. He has to run the ball, but I don't think he saw Brantley coming. Watch this.
Look at the separation of Eric Hipple and his helmet, and a good clean shot by Brantley.
The reason why I chuckle because doesn't it sound comical now with the new rules to listen to this? It's like, oh my gosh, because the game's changed quite a bit. We can change culture. The game's much safer today than it has been ever. So we can make those changes. But the thing is, when I show this, I say, what you don't know can hurt you. I get it, okay? Because that hurt. I went back in 3 plays later, by the way. And today, Scott Brantley would have been fined a huge amount of money, maybe even ejected from the game. So we have changed the game. So if what we don't know can hurt us, then let's start with what we do know. The brain's 3.5 pounds. Sits pretty well protected in our skull. But it is 100 billion different neurons that form trillions of connections, and those connections that we have are shaped and formed by from the moment we're born, and even before, but by our senses that we take in from our environment and our DNA makeup, and we start combining these things, right? And so these connections start getting formed, and intricate connections, and they're forming the connections that we're going to use to solve problems with. Because really the core mission of the brain in a physical sense is to solve problems, and it does it really, really, really well. Okay? It does it whether we're awake or asleep. In fact, if you're in deep sleep, in stage 4 sleep, your brain actually communicates in single waves where the whole brain's communicating together. It solves problems. That's why sometimes we got something on our mind and we wake up the next morning, it's like, aha, I got it, because it's still working. The thing is that the way that it does solve problems is that it does so from unconscious stuff, because we've been trained to do something, so we don't have to think about it. For me to throw a football, it's real easy. I can pick one up and throw it. I don't worry about the weight. I don't worry about the wind resistance or anything else. I just do it because I've been trained so much. I even know how much air is in it. Brady. He knew how much air was in it too, I'm telling you. Anyway. But it's automatic for me. And most of the things that we do throughout a daytime are kind of automatic because pathways have been reshaped, right? The thing about the brain, though, and I do want to make this clear, is it continues to remap itself. It's called brain plasticity until the point till we die, really. I mean, the only time it really stops is if we don't use it. And sometimes in depression, then it can actually atrophy. So we have to keep active, okay, and keep working on it. So anyway, this wonderful brain of ours is solving problems, and we get our consciousness involved, and we have to make decisions in the middle shot here of actively making decisions. Do I weigh the consequences out? What's going to happen? And so consciously we make a decision. Okay, and then of course, if I want something in the future, I've got to have to actually game plan for it, or set goals for that. And so this is how we solve problems. And the problem solving is part of our life, even when we're not even aware of it. I mean, if you've ever had any downtime, right? It's the reason why people will do crossword puzzles or Sudoku puzzles, right? Because their brain wants to occupy itself. Did anybody ever play tic-tac-toe as a kid? Okay. And as an adult, sometimes we play it with our little ones. Okay? It's because it's problem solving, right? I mean, it's a nice way to do it, and every once in a while we'll let them win, okay, to keep encouraging them. Yeah, keep trying. But have you ever seen 2 adults sit down to play tic-tac-toe? I hope not. I haven't. Because every game is what? Every game is a cat's game. There's nothing to learn, so we don't play that game, right? Every game is a cat's game. And in fact, the way the brain works, sometimes even in a traumatic event, when somebody keeps going back to what could I have done different, 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 trying to solve that problem, not until they're actually taking and exposed and showing exactly what really did happen, and there's nothing they could have done that's any different. Then all of a sudden the brain, like a cat's game, lets it go, and they're able to move forward. And so problem solving is a big deal. And the reason why video games are so enticing is because it's the purest form of problem solving. Every decision you make on that thing has a consequence to it. But if you're good enough, you get to the end of the first level. Now, game makers, they have multiple levels because they know if that was the only level you had, once you solved it, you'd never play that game again. So it keeps continuing on. So problem solving is it. Okay. So here's some problems we have, right? Financial, relationships, housing, jobs, transition. We all have these problems in our life, and we solve them every day and every month, right? Yet, when I hear somebody that dies by suicide, the first thing I hear is, oh man, they just went through a breakup. Oh man, financially they just lost their job, okay? They blame the problem for the suicide. And it's not the problem that's the problem, it's the inability to solve the problem that's the problem. And so if that's the case, then what are some of the things that can go wrong that also this wonderful brain of ours has trouble solving problems? Injury, most obvious. If you get hit in the head really hard, you can have a brain injury. But just injury in itself causes inflammation, and inflammation has an effect on the brain as well and can cause depression. Trauma, experiencing something that you don't want to experience again. In fact, It's so powerful that the brain actually tries to fragment the memory. It breaks the protein chains, or memory is found all through our head, and we recreate it every time we go to a memory. It tries to fragment it because I don't want to think about it again, or I don't want to experience it again. The trouble with that is it never gets a chance to go into the left side of the brain or the other side of the brain where it goes into a file cabinet. Here's a time and a place and a stamp on it. That's where it belongs. And no, it stays over here in this emotional side, just waiting for something else to happen, and all of a sudden we experience that emotional trauma again. It can affect us. Illness. Not only when I feel sick, I don't feel like doing the things I do when I'm healthy, but there's brain illnesses too that we need to be aware of and need to be focused on, because there are things that we can do about those as well. And of course, stress. Stress is one of the most debilitating things if it's out of control. Stress in the short run is really, really good because it amps us up, helps us perform better. But in the long run, worrying about the future, worrying about the past, it can break us down. And then, of course, the thing about when something goes on up here, when something's wrong with us up here, we can't see it. This is the ankle break I told you about when it was against San Francisco. It's Charles Haley. And if it takes you a second, but you can see my foot. It's on backwards. The other foot's his. So anyway. But the thing is, when you see that, you know, you go, oh man, you can see that, right? I had 60,000 people see that. And they all went, oh. But when something goes on up here, we can't see it. So we have to depend upon something else, which are the symptoms that we deal with. And I'm not going to go through these symptoms, but they're here for you to look at. But you guys know this thing's probably already anyway. But I want to jump to the other symptom page, okay, and highlight those bottom three, because not only are they symptoms, right, but they're also problem-solving tools that the brain uses when it's not doing well, when it doesn't feel good. And if you don't know why you don't feel good, you don't know what's wrong, your brain will go to something that it does know to try and take care of it. So if we've ever created a pathway, that's where it goes, right? So risky behavior. If I have no pleasure in my life and I can't feel anything, maybe I'll get on my motorcycle and I'll run 120 miles an hour. It's a big problem in the military. 120 miles an hour through traffic just to feel something. That's why sometimes people step out on marriages or step out on relationships just to feel something. That's why sometimes people steal something. They don't need it, but it's to feel something. And risky behavior. And sometimes not worrying about your own consequences, okay? So alcohol and other uses, if I've created that pathway, then that's where my brain's going to go. It'll use it. And of course, thoughts of death. Now, suicide, the thoughts of death, I just don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to kill myself, right? It's usually a seed that's planted somewhere along the line when things become overwhelming and I cannot solve this problem, then this solution comes through. Man, if I just died in my sleep tonight, it would be okay. So I planted a seed, and that might be the first night I get really good sleep. Because I got a solution. I don't have to worry about things tomorrow because I'm going to be there. Well, I wake up the next day, well, I got to go through it again. And so after a while, that solution starts taking more form of a way of a plan and starts thinking of a way that will actually enact that plan. And that's why we, in our suicide prevention, I use the Thomas Joyner model. I like this model because, to me, it explains some of my behavior, which is the burdensome, the isolation, and the ability to actually take a life, or actually override self-preservation. And he talks about it extensively in his model. But the burdensome and the isolation, because if you feel like a burden, you're not going to bother anybody. And if I think about death, maybe it starts off, man, I could just kill myself because that's early language, because I don't know how to express how I feel. But once I've got a plan, and that comes out to my solution, I'm not going to share it because I have an answer. I have a solution. I don't need this anymore, and I don't want to bother you. I've been enough bother. I don't want to burden you anymore. And so then I'll start pulling back and I'll start isolating. In fact, I might have the best support system in the world, but I'm not going to use it because I don't want to bother you with it. I got a solution. And so sometimes you'll hear somebody who dies by suicide, we didn't see any symptoms. They made up their mind, and now they're not going to show them to you. And so that's why all of our suicide prevention stuff requires us to ask. You know, these are the first three are military. Ask, care, escort. That's the Army's. Ask, care, treat. That's the Navy's. Recognize the symptoms. Ask, care, escort. That's the Marines. Okay, QPR, question, persuade, refer, is used by colleges across the country. Assist program. They all have to do with engagement and asking, because if a person feels like a burden, they're not going to share it. We have to ask them. And sometimes it's really hard to find out, well, you can't walk around with a symptom checklist maybe if you're a clinician, you get to do that on a basis, but just walking around, family members and friends, we don't do that. And so how do we know? Well, sometimes since our thoughts and feelings and actions are connected, and if we're stressed out, if we're going through something, if we're depression or anxiety, our perceptions are going to be warped a little bit. Okay? And so I might walk into a room, and all of a sudden people get quiet. What, they don't like me? They hate me? Well, okay, so I retract out. Well, the truth might be, maybe I walked in and they were telling a dirty joke and they didn't want me to hear it. Okay? So our perceptions, we turn inward. It's the same reason why texting in my mind is really dangerous, because if I text you information, it's information. How you receive it is depending on how you're doing. If I texted you, nice shirt, okay? And you can receive that text, you go, why, what's wrong with my shirt? What? Okay. Or you might go, oh, cool, I like my shirt too, thank you. It depends on how you're feeling, okay, and how you receive that information. So I could either get angry, or I could feel rejection, right? Or I could get happy. So it depends on how we're feeling. They're all connected. So if you see somebody blow up out of context and get angry about something, oh, I'm gonna have to go really fast. Okay, I'm gonna go through this really quick. So predictability, controllability, trust, purpose, and relationships. These are all part of stress control. Having a schedule, feeling like you're in control, and in control, we can always control what we do next, and that's the biggest part of control: trust, purpose, and relationships. Early recognition is key. I want to shift really quick, and I've got about a minute and a half to do it, but I want to talk about the true mental health is when we have this sense of well-being. It's not just not having an absence of disorder. It's when we have this true well-being of who we are. And we can do that whether we have a brain illness or not, okay? But we do it through mental fitness. That means we do the things that we need to take care of ourselves. So I know many people who are suffering from brain illnesses that are really, really, really healthy. They're healthy because they're doing the things they need to do, whether through medication or therapy, to become healthy. But I know a lot of people who don't have brain illnesses that aren't very healthy because they're not taking care of themselves. These 6 things right here. Responsibility. I'm going to talk about them really brief. I've got like 35 seconds to do it. Responsibility is recognizing choices. This to me is the cornerstone of true mental health. Recognizing the choices. If we recognize the choices we make, I don't care if they're good or bad, just recognize them. Here's what happens. It goes into number 2, which are self-esteem. And let's say my hand is my self-esteem. If I recognize that, I make a good choice, and I'm part of that, my self-esteem goes up. If I go through and recognize, a choice, something good, my self-esteem goes up. And I continue to do that. If I make a bad choice, my self-esteem still goes up if I recognize it and say that was a bad choice, because that's how I learn, and it's okay. But if I don't recognize choices, I go through life like this, and it's my self-esteem. Something good happens for me. Man, was I lucky. Something good happens for me. Man, was I the right place, right time. Something negative happens to me. Bad. Oh, it's not my fault. Something bad happens to me. Hey, that's his responsibility, not mine. That's blame. Okay? Our self-esteem never grows. And the thing about the sense of self and well-being is taking care of ourselves, which is feeling good about who we are. And if I do that, I'll have a good, healthy boundary. That means I can protect myself because I like who I am. I don't live reactively. I live in my boundary where I can say, no, I'm not going to let you say that to me. No, I'm not going to do that. But I also know how far I go before I get myself in trouble, and I'll pull back because I want good things for me, and that makes sense. And if I'm good at that, my boundary will expand, and it'll be not just this little boundary here, it'll grow to my community, it'll grow to my country, it'll grow to the world, because I want good things for me, and I want to live in a good world. And of course, vulnerability. If I've got a boundary, I can be open and honest for somebody that I choose to let inside, and I can tell them who I really am, and they can tell me who they really are. And we can have true communication. But it takes a commitment. That means I can't lift weights tonight and be in shape tomorrow. I actually have to do something about it and enact it. And that means at the end of the day, every day, we should look back and say, okay, what choices did I make today? Because I want you to recognize the good choice you make. And we make good choices all the time, but we don't recognize them. We only recognize the mistakes sometimes that we make. I want you to recognize all the good things you do, because that's where the self and well-being comes from. Getting up in the morning is a good choice. You could lay in bed all day long. Well, I get fired. No, that's a consequence. But you made a good choice by getting up, okay, and coming in here. So recognizing that's the smallest part of true mental health and mental fitness. And mental fitness is based on, there we go, okay. Mental fitness does not mean things do not happen to us, they do. They happen all the time. But what we do next We advocate for ourselves. We reach out for help. We reach out to help someone else. What we do next is what our control is. That's where mental fitness truly is, able to advocate for ourselves. Survive and thrive. That's my family now. My wife's in the back and my 2 daughters. Thank you so much for having me here. God bless you, and thank you.